Hi, thank you. So I think I want to just start by clearing one thing up if it isn't abundantly clear. I'm an English person, and what that means, thank you. See if you applaud the next bit. There's a great line by John Lancaster who says that for English people, the notion of complaining about something is the most terrifying thing imaginable. Like, English people are the kind of people that if somebody spills a cup of tea on them, they'll apologize. English people, the social anxiety associated with complaining, terrifying. Moaning, on the other hand, something that English people are very comfortable with. And there is a daily publishing email newsletter that comes out of the UK every day called Book to Book. It's kind of the UK version of Shelf Awareness or Publisher's Lunch. Because the time difference, it comes out like while I'm walking to work. And let me tell you, moaning. I think that in the language, the professional technical language of email marketing, it's referred to as a Jeremiad. I think it's actually a good prism on how the publishing industry sees the notion of change, because 20 headlines every day, guaranteed 3 or 4 of them will be, why are publishers so slow? Is publishing dying because of blogging, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want a really good morning morale boost, highly recommended. But my point really is that most of the times when publishers talk about change and change management, it's with a subtext of this isn't going so well, which is actually the opposite of what I want to talk about. Because I want to make the argument that we're in this absolutely fantastic, world historical, best possible scenario kind of situation when it comes to change and the possibilities of change. So I'm hoping to talk about a attitude correction. So by way of an agenda, I'd like to sort of quick preliminary review of how change is typically approached. This isn't going to upend anybody's expectations. There aren't any magic bullets. But then I want to outline 2 kind of key strategic problems. One to do with an increasingly diversified sales and discovery channel. One of them to do with consumer expectations and interactions. And touch on 3 key perspectives. And sketch out for each a kind of possible approach and some terrifying pitfalls and some ways forward. But I want to start with everyone's favorite topic, resume design. I am a big fan of the art and science of resume design because the internet provides, just as it does for medical advice, lots of fantastic and reassuring information to make things easier for everyone involved in the process. And I'm so interested in this that I actually wrote something about it in the hope that if somebody applies for a job that has my name as the hiring manager, they would Google my name and find this advice. And then I followed all kinds of rules to try and gain the search engines and artificially improve the page rank. And I still get all kinds of resumes. Some of them are bland and they clearly communicate the required information in an appropriate and quickly accessible structure. I love these ones. Some of them follow less good advice in an attempt to make them stand out. I consider these an opportunity for me to learn something in the process too, because there's a huge amount of innovation. But all of them are very, very fulsome on the list of skills that they proclaim they can bring to the job and the industry and the company. And I think this is pretty good advice because there are lots of skills that we've been told and we tell everyone who will listen that we need to bring into the industry and we need to acquire and we need to develop. And they're usually to do with technologies rather than new approaches and new ways of looking at the business. They're actually incredibly stressful because they put huge pressure on people who are already responsible for this area of the industry, whether that's a production team that has to learn new skills and change their workflow, or for the company to develop a specialization in an area they've never needed it before. And sometimes the ambiguity and the stresses and strains of all of these different things is people are dealing with their work-life balance while they're trying to take new classes. They're trying to creatively adapt their existing workflows. They're trying to become more efficient. It's very stressful, and that's just the kind of bottom-up ways that companies approach change. And then there are the top-down, we'll come up with a new strategy, we're going to build all these apps, or every book needs to have an animated video introduction, these top-down strategies. And the idea is that they're supposed to kind of naturally cohere in the middle and lead to productive work. But actually what tends to happen, and these problems are predictable, is you continue trying to do everything that you already do, presumably more efficiently. Many organizations kind of fail at this exercise of change because not everybody buys in, and not everyone at the top has all the right ideas or information, and everyone's busy. There's an MIT professor called Edgar Schein, who's spent most of his career studying organizational culture. And I want to introduce his model because I'll come back to it later. I think it's helpful about specific companies, it's helpful about a specific industry or sector. He argues that a culture gets set really, really early on. The first time that a company or an area has to kind of make a decision about a problem that they haven't approached before, there might be quite a lot of conversation about it, and then they decide this is how we're going to approach it. And then that behavior gets set, and the next time a similar-ish problem comes up, the same approach is taken with even less discussion, and the third or fourth or fifth times, this is the solution, this is how we deal with this. And so at that early point, those are the kind of early approaches that are set, and they've quickly become unspoken assumptions. They're not described or questioned or articulated, they're just, this is how we do work here. That's culture. On top of them lives this structure of what are called espoused values, and these are the things that, this is when people will talk about, this is our strategy, these are our priorities. These things you can say you're going to change. And on top of all of those are what he calls artifacts of the culture. These things like org charts and process maps, and they're easy to spot, but if you don't share any of the underlying assumptions, they're pretty hard to decipher. It's just a list of stuff. So, I'll come back to that, but I'd like to make an argument that actually seizing this opportunity that we have and not moaning about change isn't really going to come from tinkering with org charts or polishing organizational skill sets or pronouncing new strategies. It's instead about releasing the creative potential that's at the basis of our culture. And this is where I think as a creative industry we have this huge inbuilt advantage. Okay, so I said I'd talk about two specific problems, and the way into the first is to talk about big data, which we know we're all supposed to want because this is a publishing technology conference. I think why remains a fair question to ask. And there's a technology up approach to this, which says, well, you have more information than you ever did before, so surely there's some things that you could do with it. And that's true. We have lots of data we didn't have before. We either have access to it faster, or it's a wider and more comprehensive view, or it comes at us from new platforms and services or companies that are engaged in like an arms warfare for the online advertising business. Or it comes from new entrants, new channels. It comes in the interests that some companies have in developing their own particular approach to consumers. Many of these things are under NDA. So as a shorthand, since this is the image that comes up in Google search when you search for Vendor Central, if you see this again, you know that it means proprietary sales data portal, obviously. So fair enough, let's start here. We've got lots of sales data, sometimes delicious new data points. Why do we need a way of looking at this information that's any better than just emailing top 10s and top 50s around each week? Not that that isn't interesting and fun. And given that there are lots of places in the industry where analytically we kind of top out at what's a standard deviation and a few people who know how to do VLOOKUPs and pivot tables, why would we consider hiring anybody who has a skill set that looks anything like this intimidating pyramid of death? And I'm going to try and answer it with two charts. This is Apple's software and services revenue broken out by quarter since the end of 2006. And the thing I want to point your attention to is the little brown blocks that appear after the launch of the iPad in 2010. And by the way, this is a chart. It comes from Horace Didieu, who you should read. This part of their business, which is just software and services, is about half of Google's core advertising business. So to put that in perspective, and this is a year old, there's Google, Microsoft, Apple, Samsung. That's Apple in the middle. And the entirety of the first chart that I showed you, that books were that tiny slice, is just the purple area in the middle of the top chart there. Amazon is over there on the right. There's a reason it isn't broken out, because with Amazon, it's quite a bit harder to get a sense of exactly what part books are in their business. But my point is that many of the new partners we have in this business are incredibly diverse in the range of products and services with which they approach their consumers. And that's ever more true, obviously, of Indigo as well. There's lots of private companies that specialize in books, independents, Kobo, who admittedly have a very large devices business and also sell magazines. And so you can't, because they're private, you can't do this kind of breakout. But my point is, by the time you layer in Walmart, Costco, Target, Shoppers, more or less anywhere else that our consumers, our end consumers for this industry, purchase their books, books are increasingly a minority part of the business of these companies. And another critical point is that for a lot of these companies, they're incentivized to sell books, and for that matter, all digital media and content, not for the purposes of selling more books and digital media, but for the purposes of providing compelling advantages to their platforms, whether that's a hardware business or web services that are monetized through advertising or e-commerce. And crucially, these are all data-run companies who are incredibly well informed about who their customers are. So my bullet point at the end of this is we really need to be able to position books as opportunities, not our opportunities, but opportunities within the businesses on their own terms. Okay, that was the first chart. Second chart. Okay, you're gonna love this. Let me come back to it. I'm going to show you findings of a sociological study that was carried out a few years ago, and I'm indebted to a sociologist called Kieran Healy for this. Basically, they examined what happens if you have a set of cultural goods, in this case songs, of equal quality, and they took this batch of songs they were going to test, and they tested them with a separate control group to make sure that everyone basically agreed these were all good songs, right? And so they put these back into this study market and said, all we're going to do is change the visibility of the social signal. So what happens, you have people downloading songs, and the only thing that varies is whether they can see how many other people also downloaded those songs. That's the only thing. Now, they found something that we all think we know, which is pretty obvious, which is you get these viral effects, right? So the equality of the distribution of sales or downloads becomes radically more unequal, right? The hits sap up much more of the demand. The other thing they found is that with the cultural goods, the songs that come out on top, becomes fantastically unpredictable. So you get these winner-takes-all hits markets, but you can't predict from one moment to another which is going to be the hit that comes out on top, which is amazingly unintuitive to us because we're preconditioned to think that quality will win out. As soon as you introduce a social signal, it becomes radically unpredictable. So we have partners in growing channels with a rigorous focus on data, and we have increasing but observable instability in demand. So the importance of being able to recognize subtle cues in consumer behavior, sales performance from huge data sets, and then being able to make use of those insights in sales and marketing and account management. Is the solution as obvious as it seems? Do we need this kind of a skill set? I think probably yes, but two things to say. First of all, I don't think everybody with the necessary means should go out and hire a statistician. I mean, I'm a big advocate of hiring specialists. On the other hand, good statistics and SQL classes are pretty affordable. But I think there's also a huge opportunity here for an enterprising, unaffiliated industry organization to kind of provide these services at scale to the industry. That's the first thing I have to say. The second thing is, these skills are not the most important skills that you need in this area. To make that point, I need to take a brief digression. Does anybody know, I think Ryan's in the room, does anybody know what these things are? There's no test. Plenty of hands, that's extreme, wow, enthusiastic waving at the back of the room. These are data types. So when you're building a database or you're working on a programming language, you need to know what kinds of data you're going to be storing in different areas so that your storage and your queries and your functions can efficiently run across all of that. They're actually the foundation for Excel as well, which almost nobody knows, which is very sad. And the process of changing one of those pieces of information to another data type is called data typecasting. I think we need another concept of data typecasting to explain what happens when data and analytics are introduced into new environments. If you just show up and start spraying information around, what happens? So I'm going to propose a few new data types today. First up is hobo data. Hobo data, also known as itinerant, migrant, or vagabond data. This is data that wanders free of its origin. Nobody knows where it came from. Nobody knows where it's going to meet its end. Last seen by the railroad tracks near a group of delinquent teenagers. It's probably the most obvious kind of data malady. It never seems to know where it's going. People are kind of anxious to claim it if they think they can get a vote, but they don't want to hug it. Let's say there's a significant drop-off in sales from a third book in a series to the fourth book in a series. Or sales are disproportionately high in one province. That's nice. Is that province unusually high, or are the other provinces unusually low? Is it to do with demographics or inventory? Is there some difference in the advertising profile? Is there a difference in sales placement for the third book? And hobo data seems to suggest some kind of deeper truth or some kind of actionable insight, but unless it's quickly rehoused, it wanders free. And then it comes back in the most unexpected ways. Book 4 was lousy. Book clubs in Ontario drove the book there. Hobo data. Next up, promiscuous data. Promiscuous data wants to flirt and bond and make friends even when and where it shouldn't. It spends a lot of time on Tinder. Promiscuous data spends time with everybody, and everyone thinks that they understand it. Double and triple percentage increases are almost always promiscuous data types. Everyone wants to get to know them. They tend to provoke extreme reactions. Nobody likes getting dumped. And they're often superficial. But the point is that these extreme reactions just suck the middle ground out of conversation. Then there's phantom data. Phantom data is the data that everyone thought was there and behaved as if it was. It wasn't really there. And sometimes those are really benign examples. They come from just like arbitrary data decisions. You're comparing calendar periods, don't capture like comparable consumer behaviors. Like sales were up 7.8% last week, year over year. Easter was a different time last year. So you get these kind of data artifacts that just float around in the dark. And then you get data singularities. These are like magnetic gravitational data. These attract other data points, but then can obscure them. Especially if an organization is focusing around them for some kind of collective decision. So very often like big strategic objectives or some kind of KPI that was picked out 18 months before the project actually launched, and then that's always lingered as this is how we're going to measure the success of this. And when data gets typecast like this, you get a culture with a certain set of figures. So there's the zealot who obsessively believes in a certain piece of information and never misses an opportunity to assault others with them. He's closely associated with the man with one fact. And sorry, it should be clearer here. The focus is Cyclops, not Clive Cussler. Clive Cussler is a man with many facts. The data Nostromo, who's the rare figure who's entrusted by the ruling class to engage with data amongst the indigenous population, but will never be fully accepted by them. Every time you mention Nostromo at a publishing conference, Nathan buys you a drink. And there's the data Jedi, the powerful but apparently corruptible figure who has unsurpassed access to and ability to manipulate information, but often lives in a state of hermitage because of the trauma of previous badly turned out good intentions. And there are more, obviously, right? There's the data protectorates, there's the group of people that only they can touch the data. So those are the villains. And certainly I'm one of them from time to time. And data, it's in many ways, it's inevitable this is going to happen. It's incredibly hard for us to absorb a piece of information without bonding it to something that we think that we already know. We want to synthesize it, systemize it, interpret it. We want to overcome doubt and locate patterns and get to decisions. And it's incredibly difficult to have information just kind of stand on its own merits rather than be in the service of some kind of previously existing narrative. or nexus of doubt. And this is especially true in the case of some new approach or new strategy that's intended to address change. So I think this calls for an example, but these things are by definition hard to talk about since, I mean, they usually involve failure at some level, typically at the managerial level. So hypothetical example. Let's say that you work at a book publisher that recently started an online magazine for all kinds of reasons. And let's say that about a year in, let's say in the 48th in a series of regular columns about writers and their libraries, there's some minor controversy that kicks off. And you get a month's worth of web traffic in 36 hours. So that's nice. Textbook hobo data. Because how did this help us sell any books yesterday? Admittedly, we sold a few more of his books. The long answer is the traffic brought in a lot of inbound links, which is good for the domain's authority and increased the page rank of the site overall. Now all of our authors have a higher search result on Google, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera. That takes a lot of time and patience and respect and work to contextualize, even if everybody bought into the strategy to start out with. Because the valences for this kind of information, they just don't exist. We don't have a way of processing that data point. There's no way to instinctively house it. There's nothing about it in the underlying values of the culture. It requires a narrative. And organizations and industries that are unfamiliar with data-driven decision-making of this type, or with wide data fluency, or even widespread data access, they need exactly this skill set: context, unpacking, storytelling, narratives. Narratives which are accurate, they provide context, they provide data on terms familiar to the organization, and crucially are open to unpacking and rewriting if necessary. And right now in the industry, we have lots and lots of data workflows that look like this. Standardized reports, often with hideous manual processes that somebody's burning time on, going into distributing flat data without context via email to be read 5 minutes before a meeting on a tiny display, and then in the meeting, it's just presented and it just dies. And we need workflows that look more like this, where the workflow structure and a modest increase in data fluency allows the addition of context and openness of interpretation, and really moving away from a culture of data delivery towards a culture of insight and decisions. So, do we need new skills? Sure. But possibly not as much as we need the old ones. See if you can guess where this is going. So, a few quick suggestions before I move on to problem 2. Take a look at the data that gets manually distributed, supposedly for the purposes of business result driving. Ask the recipients some friendly questions. If you send it to 60 people every week, but after a couple of weeks of polite nudging, could you please fill out this quick 4-question survey? You only get 3 or 4 responses. That's telling you something. It's time to re-examine how you're using that time and how the information is being presented. It helps you re-examine the amount of time that's being spent, but it's also a subtle cultural nod that reporting is for a purpose and not to serve a process. Start to socialize a handful of new terms when you're talking about information. Get a few more people to understand what a standard deviation is. Use box plots to visualize distribution. And these things are complicated to start out with, but over time you get people comfortable with their own capabilities to understand, which makes them feel like they can participate in the conversation. And you have a valuable vocabulary around which you can build relative instead of absolute importance, which is, I think this is critical, is that talking about business decisions that could be made as the outcome of analysis, there's always relative to other business decisions that you could make. And just by focusing on or talking about something else, I mean, it's easy to go super deep on analytics in one area, and you miss a more obvious opportunity elsewhere. So what you're trying to get to here, I think, is a culture of informed discussion. And my point is that's inherently an imaginative, creative storytelling skill set. Okay, second problem. So if the first problem was navigating this diversified and unpredictable sales and discovery channel, as a way into the second problem, I think I need to talk about social. And sorry, I know this has been very much the thing that everyone's been hearing about since 2003, and usually with a lot of very specific how to do it recommendations. Good news. I'm going to talk about it in the context of mobile. At least I'm not talking about piracy and DRM, the other typical party crashers. I want to get into this through a model of how authors' books get to readers. And obviously, this has traditionally happened through various intermediate parties. For reasons that are going to become obvious, I just want to focus on the relationship between audiences and those immediate parties. So let's just clean this up a little bit. I'm going to keep authors in the picture because I always feel like if we don't do that, then we may as well be painting a target on ourselves. But let's just agree to keep this simple for now, and let's just say publishers, we don't need to see them all the time, they're acting on behalf of their authors. If you disagree with that proposition, you think publishers don't act on behalf of their authors, then we can settle this like English people afterwards with drinks in a parking lot. So this is obviously an absurd oversimplification, no libraries, no used bookstores, of the traditional model. Bear with me. This is the traditional model of thinking about how publishers bring books to market. In other words, how they find their way to readers. Through physical retailers, booksellers, and through broadcast and print media. And there's obviously a lot of other things that fuel word of mouth, a little more off the books, and this model stopped being sufficient decades ago. So we're going to skip ahead a bit, but not before pointing to the diversity that existed in the booksellers channel, even with the emergence of chain booksellers in the 90s. So this is the kind of intermediate model, and we've already moved past this several years ago. But let's say in the first kind of 10, 15 years max of internet popularization, this is what it looked like. Much more complex. So the internet fundamentally transformed traditional media. Internet search is the primary means to find things online, and e-commerce is more or less the other major thing that people do, again, in this first kind of 10 years or so. Let's note, though, how little diversity there is in those two huge new categories. Internet search, effectively Google, and internet retailers, again, first 10 years or so, effectively meaning Amazon. Now, these new channels, they have their own languages. So as a publisher, I mean, just like the language of booksellers is sales and product knowledge and account management, co-op, I suppose. For search engines, the language you need to know to get your books to market is search engine optimization and proprietary AdWords. For internet retailers, it's the accuracy and quality of your metadata and assets, how successfully you watch and manage conversion to the extent you can control it. Those are skills, obviously. They're languages. You need to know those languages. If you don't know those languages, you lose access to readers for the books and the writers that you publish. Also, jerks like me are going to cherry pick embarrassing examples, admittedly minor, and show them at publishing conferences. So, okay, now into social. Facebook and Twitter, obviously, but hundreds of social networks all around the world, things called Orkut, Hives. There is actually a social network called Hives. LinkedIn, Google+, Pinterest, et cetera, This is the model we've gotten ourselves super comfortable with over the last few years, and we've put in place strategies in just the same way that we developed the capability to speak the language of search and the language of e-commerce. Now we speak the language of those social platforms. But I'd like to frame this in a different way, and I have to point to Ben Thompson and Benedict Evans, who are analysts, for this way of looking at it. This is a model that makes a lot of sense in a very stable, desktop-centered world in which kind of Facebook is the social winner in the way that Google was the search winner. Does anybody remember this? This is the Yahoo directory page. So back in 1997, when you created a website, I really hope there's people in the room. Is there anybody in the room who has no idea what this is? Excellent. So in 1997, when you created a website, the first thing you did was you went and registered it in Yahoo's directory. Like a phone book, they had a directory of websites. That's how anyone found websites, by browsing the directory. So first of all, The joke's on all of us. I took this yesterday. This directory still exists. But after a while, search engines like Alta Vista emerged. Google came along with a superior PageRank and just killed all of the rivals. And Google became the dominant way to navigate the internet on the desktop. And so Benedict Evans and others argue that for the mobile internet, we're still in that directory phase, that we haven't seen the natural way to navigate the mobile internet. It might be search, but it could be social. And it's not a foregone conclusion that social will be what social is now. And it's kind of in that environment that Facebook just paid $19 billion to acquire WhatsApp. It's where WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, and many, many, many others are competing. To give you a sense of where we are, and this is Horace Dediu again, we're in that gap. That is the next 10 years or so. The future predicted growth for mobile internet is just, it's astounding. In this scenario, and we're already seeing like the number of these pocket computer devices is already approaching the number of desktop computing devices that are active. And there's a large part of the world's population that doesn't have one of these things in their pockets. So the market is much, much larger than desktop ever was, and the use cases are unimagined. Okay, so what? The first thing to point out is that these new services, Line, WhatsApp, WeChat, are valued by investors based on monthly active users, the ubiquitous MAUs. More specifically, growth in MAUs. So right or wrong, that's where the money is right now. And therefore, that's where our competition and innovation is right now. How do you provide services which are compelling users and not only attract more of them, but provide a better experience if they can persuade their friends and colleagues and families to also join the service? And so, big surprise, for many of them, the way to provide that is written content. Reading, writing, sharing, commenting. Many, many, many of these companies competing with one another for users are putting in place publishing platforms, including LinkedIn, which just launched its own publishing platform. Medium, from one of the founders of Twitter, which has this gorgeous writing, reading, and editing, commenting experience. I'd certainly say that this is obviously the territory that Wattpad inhabits. Among other things, it's a fully fledged social network for which the currency of that interaction is stories. I hope that Ashley will clock me if that sounds like a misstatement. Are these platforms competition for book publishers? Certainly in terms of entertainment hours spent. And there's this nightmare scenario that television providers face, which isn't from cord cutters, who are people in their 20s who just cancel their cable subscription because they can get what they want to see from Netflix and Amazon and elsewhere. That's elsewhere in inverted commas. But cord nevers who have never had a cable subscription, and it wouldn't occur to them because they already have more than enough to watch and read and kick around online. But beyond that, I would argue that we're already in this space. This is the purchase motivation from BookNet's 2013 consumer research study, which you should buy. Now, a group of these clearly aggregate together. Pleasure/relaxation and vacation are clearly the same kind of thing. Information and work/career, probably also. Gifts, over 10%, and that's consistent year round. It's not like there's a huge spike in Q3, Q4, and that radically skews the rest of the annual data. Gifts is a constant throughout the year. People buy books, of course, for their utility, to entertain, to just mainline the information that's in there. But those folks who are on Pinterest posting book covers and getting massive viral traction are onto something. Because for many readers, it's the emotional, associative, performative, identity aspects of reading. Being able to participate in a cultural conversation, being able to see in your library a reflection of the kind of reader that you hope to be. Books are cultural currency. And they're cultural currency for a desire to participate in a larger conversation or aspiration to have a certain type of imaginative life. Which I think is why people buy more books than they read, which I think we can all agree is good. Okay, so why would anybody be satisfied with one of these services when they can have books? This smells a bit like the classic disruption of Clayton Christensen's formulation, where you have an original incumbent players. So they're in the market early and they innovate in a very steady fashion, usually in reference to one another. So one publisher gets a sweet deal that enables them to print with French flaps on trade paperbacks. And suddenly you see them on every literary novel. And it's this rate of innovation, it's happening relative to companies in the same space, and it's merely steady, but it starts to track ahead of consumers' minimum requirements. But a new entrant to the market, often with their business origin in a completely different area, completely different set of problems, has a rival product, and initially it looks like a game. It looks like incredibly low quality level, unacceptably low. But over time, as the technology improves, it satisfies that minimum customer requirement and disrupts the industry. And often the incumbents, who of course were the original innovators, see the threat coming, but it's almost impossible to make a strong business case to develop in this area, because who's going to go to their boss and say, we should make a worse product that makes us less money? And in some ways, I think this is what happened with ebooks. Different kind of experience, one optimized for a different kind of reading, obviously after these devices died. I know I showed this last year. I actually tried to turn it on this year. I couldn't figure out how to, I couldn't figure out what the on switch was. But ebooks, obviously, an experience is much more optimized to mainlining narrative. And the truth is, for many readers, narrative, voice, speed of delivery, at their best, are good enough. Just like Wikipedia and YouTube are good enough if you want basic information. So that's the second problem, if you will. We face competition not just on the basis of form or publishing model, but the kind of cultural currency that books provide for so many people. Okay, so I don't have a solution. I'm suggesting we consider our approach. And the good news is, what's great about our industry is also what's terrifying. Just the sheer volume of books, every product we make is new and potentially disrupts or cannibalizes the old. So we already have that going for us. But I think it's also true that this complicated soup of emotional fulfillment that goes in a book purchasing is not universally served by the most efficient way to get the story into your brain. There are different kinds of consumer needs. And I think we're already taking advantage of them. Increasingly, we have these high-end, limited editions, special editions, for those of whom books are an identity badge. We're in this golden age of print book design. As the requirements of the one-size-fits-all bundle start to drop away, this is exactly the kind of opportunity that others have identified, that the consumer experience of books is not fulfilled at the moment of purchase or even the moment of reading, but has these long-lasting emotional traces. A good publication is like a cultural passport, and it can appeal to readers in all kinds of different ways. Publishers have the ability to think of themselves as design companies who craft the presentation of books to ignite for readers the sense that they're becoming the kind of readers they want to be. Or events management companies. Or from the perspective of authors, publishers are intellectual property management companies. And there are just huge opportunities in the digital space here, just because the barriers to entry and distribution are so low. So those online events could be author events on Twitter, cultural convention events that could be addressed by, say, smart audio publishing. Hypothetical example, you should subscribe and enjoy and favorably review a podcast called The Arcade. My point is, these things we can bring to the digital goods market, not by making our ebooks prettier, though we should be doing that too, but also thinking about what are the extraordinary design assets that we produce. Things left in archives, things left on the editing floor. How could we be thinking about digital goods that could be stickers on IM services like Line, or custom typefaces that we could sell? Is there an opportunity to use excerpts in a different way? Sounds good? All kinds of reasons why strategies built around that approach would be really hard. And these are all completely legitimate reasons on their own merits. And also because culturally, we've aligned our industry and our organizations to efficiently, optimally produce books, not to be design companies or event management companies. That required choices. And these questions aren't whining, they're legitimately incredibly hard to solve, really hard. I think this point goes unstated too often. The hard problems are the ones that we're supposed to solve. Anyone can solve the easy problems. If the problems are hard for you, they're really hard for your competitors, and usually, actually, in truth, much harder for large companies. Secondly, we can all come up with sensible reasons to approach and address all of these problems, which I reiterate are completely legitimate and sensible concerns that should be raised. But what we're doing, I think, when we do that is engaging with the artifacts of the culture. We're not having the conversation about the underlying assumptions of the culture that are really feeding into codified processes and really actually preventing us from inspecting these processes. Now, Edgar Schein points to a handful of possible ways to overcome these problems. Crisis, everyone enjoys crisis, or understanding the origins of the culture and repeatedly presenting new problems to people that have to be solved in a new way. Lots to say about that, but I think it's helpful to acknowledge that in older companies and industries, working within unquestioned underlying assumptions is kind of working for people that used to work there. It's really a variety of institutional ancestor worship with its own fertility cults, pointlessly complaining about Amazon. And so I hope we can agree in an enlightened humanist industry that institutional ancestor worship is a little bit silly. So I have a few suggestions. First of all, I think we need to find the points at which culture is communicated and concentrate on them. And it's fascinating how counterintuitive this is. This kind of cultural lock-in is most at risk when bringing new people on board. You bring in somebody with all of these new skills, but the departing employees are really anxious to kind of secure their legacy, prove themselves, validate the things that they did for years, and the new employees are really anxious to fit in, to be efficient, and so onboarding can really intensify these cultural habits. So we have to let some of these processes rust, decay. And again, this is counterintuitive because it feels like incompetence. But the truth is, you need to do everything possible to accelerate institutional forgetfulness. Another suggestion, have people audit their own workload. Exactly who is doing exactly what and how much time does it take up? And I mean, cataloging the use of time is tedious and boring. It's just as boring as auditing your workflow, your reporting. It's a distraction from actual work, but it's amazingly efficient at revealing where time is getting burned on old problems. Most of all, we need to articulate stories about our organization and the industry that are about adapting to change. We need to reframe those origin stories. Most critically, we need to articulate stories about the organization that are about adapting to change. And if you're still alive in a creative industry and you can't tell a story about adapting to change, then you're not paying attention. This one just speaks for itself. This one is a little counterintuitive too. But it's exactly those kind of creative storytelling, rhetorical skills that are essential in shaking loose unstated assumptions. And this, I think, is exactly where, as an industry, we have this huge outsized advantage. Because we're not a manufacturing industry trying to get its head around 3D printing. We're a creative industry whose basic trade is ideas. And before I close on that, let me wrap this up, as every talk of this type should, with a discussion of Mexican drug ballads. So, narco corridos are popular songs celebrating tales of crime and havoc that are often commissioned, the songs commissioned by Mexican drug cartels. This, of course, is a long-standing business model for cultural production known as patronage. And there are very many more worthy precedents and beneficiaries, including Shakespeare. Patronage was a perfectly sustainable business model for centuries, almost as long as bards wandered the countryside with roaming armies setting fire to rival city-states, which I am in no way advocating. This is how artists had art reach audiences. And there are some who would argue that new services like Kickstarter or Patreon are the successors of the patronage model, with the virtuous difference that the money's now coming from audiences, not patrons. And then there are these ballooning variety of services who publish in their own way and for their own reasons. There are flat publishing and distribution services, with some degree of social signal mediating them. And even there are, of course, very important ones with their own structure and dynamics, like Kobo's Writing Life, Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing. So it isn't like publishing doesn't face competition for other business models. And many of these new ways are already perfectly sustainable and growing ways to get creative work to audiences. For a business model as comparatively, historically speaking, as young as publishing, I think we need to get our heads around the notion that this is not a problem requiring moaning, requiring responsive change, but rather this extraordinary once-in-a-generation opportunity to engage with consumers along vectors of experience which are wholly new to them and to authors, to participate in these wild ride markets as social signals and other factors become a stronger part of consumers' decision-making, and to take the authors and the voices and stories that we represent to unimagined audiences. So we need new skills, we need new perspectives. We should all be working hard with the educational programs in this space to help bring that about. But crucially, focusing on the need for change blinds us to the fact that we already do many of the things necessary to adapt to this landscape. If we conceive of publishing as a process, then we get publishers who manufacture books and bring them to market. But the conception of publishing as a mission, if we believe that publishing is the best model to deliver the broadest possible range of ideas to the broadest possible publics, and we should, then publishing is the business of cultivating a public. And in this vision, publishers are cultural accelerators, they're fire starters, they're cultural impresarios, and they're increasing the reach that they can provide to authors, and providing readers cultural satisfaction in different ways, different media, different platforms. Increasing the creative capacity of our companies and our industry doesn't come from hiring new people or retraining current people or getting more efficient. It comes from releasing the creative skill set that's within our culture. Change is not an act of hiring or training or casting of grand plans. Change is an act of the imagination, and that's a resource that creative industries have in great wealth. Thank you.